A quiet evening in the heart of the capital. Just hours later, an entire powerful family would be shattered, leaving behind a blood-soaked crime scene and one chilling question. Who was behind it all when all evidence seemed to have been wiped clean? Only cold, calculating eyes remained. Bernice Alanis Morales was born in 1985 in Hidalgo State, Mexico, into a family facing severe economic hardship. From an early age, she had to become familiar with a life of scarcity where future choices seemed always limited by tight material conditions and an environment full of barriers. Growing up in such circumstances, Bernice didn't have the opportunity to receive a proper education or access to personal development opportunities like many of her peers. However, despite her lack of formal education, she still carried within her a progressive spirit and the desire to change her life. Like many young women at 18, Bernice harbored grand dreams of a better future. In 2003, while searching for a job to begin her independence, she happened to see a job posting stuck outside a gym. They needed a maintenance worker. It wasn't an ideal job and it didn't require advanced degrees or special skills, but for Bernice, it was a precious opportunity as a starting point. Without thinking too long, she decided to apply. Although she knew this position was quite modest, she still believed it could be the first door, opening the path to achieving her future goals. And that choice for her was completely right. The facility where Bernice applied was actually one of many businesses owned by successful lawyer and businessman Jacobo Quesada. And this man, though Bernice didn't know it at the time, would become the key figure in the biggest turning point of her life, leading her closer to the dream of a future she had always longed for. Jacobo Rafael Quesada Joe, born in 1968 in Hidalgo State, showed exceptional business acumen from a young age. In his 20s, when most of his peers were still struggling to find their own direction, Jacobo had already begun building the first foundation of his career. Also during this time, he met Patricia Arellano. Their relationship developed quickly, and as many expected, ended in a happy marriage. The family life of Jacobo and Patricia, viewed from the outside, seemed to be the ideal model that many people desired. A happy couple, to lovely children, and a prosperous, stable lifestyle. They appeared before the public as a perfect family, not only wealthy, but also close-knit and harmonious. As time passed, Jacobo's business activities expanded and began to generate profits. Moving into the early 2000s, he had timely seized opportunities to invest in many different fields. From real estate to commercial establishments, he gradually owned a series of properties in many areas throughout Mexico, especially in the capital, Mexico City. Among these, the gyms he opened not only brought stable income, but also created numerous job opportunities for local people, including Baron. Among the many business establishments owned by Jacobo, there was one special gym, not because of the profit it brought, but because of the spiritual value tied to his family. This was the place Jacobo established with the purpose of helping his children take their first steps into the business world. Instead of handing management over to outsiders, he wanted his own children to take responsibility for work here, viewing it as a practical environment for learning and developing management skills. This gym was located in a quiet residential area in Mexico City. Inside, the first floor of the building was designed like an apartment or auxiliary house originally intended for his children's use. However, over time, not only the children, but the entire family often came here, turning it into a familiar living space. It was at this facility that fate arranged for Jacobo and Bernice to meet. At that time, the young woman was looking for work and appeared as a new employee right when Jacobo's marriage was beginning to crack. Perhaps it was Bones' gentle, hardworking, and calm appearance that made the successful businessman feel something different. Over time, Bernice gradually won his trust. Initially just a modest employee, she caught Jacobo's attention and was eventually entrusted with the role of housekeeper for the family. But what Jacobo couldn't have imagined was that this seemingly simple decision would open up a chain of tragic events, not only for him, but for his entire family later on. According to reports, the relationship between Bones and Hakabo, which began in secret, gradually developed into a clandestine affair. Both kept this secret for a time until July 2000, for when Hakabo suddenly asked for a divorce from his wife, a decision that shocked those who knew his family. Not long after, he publicly lived with Brinas despite the scrutinizing looks and opposition from family. What made people even more surprised was Hakobo's quick move toward marriage with the young woman, as if all barriers couldn't stop his choice. This relationship completely turned upside down the lives of those involved. After the divorce was finalized, Patricia, Hakobo's ex-wife, decided to leave Mexico and move to Spain. Meanwhile, their children, though still studying and helping their father with business, chose to stay with Hakabo and his new wife. Although there was initially some distance, gradually Bones won their affection, step by step, becoming part of the family. At first glance, everything unfolded like a modern fairy tale. A girl born into poverty, who once had to struggle with manual labor, now stepped into a completely different world where she lived in luxury and extravagance, enjoying all the privileges that money could bring. Like a real-life Cinderella, Baron seemed to have touched the dream that many people only dared to imagine. Jacobo, infatuated with love and not sparing money to pamper his young wife, was ready to do everything to satisfy her new interests, demands, and aspirations. Brinas could now easily access luxury items she had previously only dreamed of. Designer clothes from famous brands, expensive cars, and trips to major cities around the world. On social media, people caught glimpses of her with her husband and family appearing at elegant restaurants or strolling through fashionable streets in New York. From a girl who grew up in poverty, Brinas had completely stepped into an unimaginable world of luxury. This transformation didn't just stop at lifestyle or environment, but was also clearly reflected in her appearance. There were many rumors that Jacobo had paid for his wife to undergo a series of cosmetic surgeries to improve her figure, fitting the image of an upper-class lady. However, when wealth had become a given, it was also when temptations began to creep in silently. Bones began to crave more, as if the current luxury was still not enough to fill the void within her. After many years of seeming stability, Jacobo gradually noticed an inexplicable change in his young wife. Bones was no longer the gentle, friendly, and grateful woman she had been initially. Instead, she gradually became cold, distant, even somewhat indifferent in her behavior toward him. By 2018, the cracks in Jacobo's family were no longer just limited to emotions or the distance between husband and wife. A series of strange and terrifying events began to expose the unsettling dark corners of what seemed to be a peaceful household. Cleaning staff working at the family mansion suddenly discovered locks of hair, portrait photos of Jacobo's children, along with many other items hidden carefully in dark corners, all believed to be props for witchcraft rituals that Baron secretly performed. According to reports, Brinas had secretly given family members sedatives mixed into drinks, making them lose their guard. Taking advantage of the situation, she secretly cut their hair and used it in mysterious rituals with the purpose believed to be manipulating fate, preventing her husband's biological children from becoming heirs to the enormous fortune. These actions, though not yet brought to public light at the time, made the atmosphere in the family increasingly heavy, full of suspicion and instability. But things didn't stop there. Hakabo had to face an even bigger shock. He discovered that the wife he had once loved wholeheartedly was having an affair with one of the trainers at the family gym. But what truly devastated him was an unbelievable accusation. Bones was not only betraying him with an outsider, but also having an intimate relationship with his own biological son. Although it wasn't clear how deep this relationship went, just the suspicion alone was enough to ignite extreme anger and a feeling of ultimate betrayal. Unable to bear it any longer, Hakabo decided to remove Bernice's name from his will. However, for reasons that weren't made clear, he still didn't proceed with divorce proceedings and continued to let her live in the family house. Some sources suggest that despite being betrayed and deeply hurt, Hakabo still couldn't completely sever his feelings for Brennis. The man, according to accounts, had loved her to the point of being willing to continue providing for and supporting her. As if the fragile hope of reconciliation hadn't completely died within him, this attitude made his daughter extremely angry. The young woman constantly urged her father to be decisive, to kick Brennis out of the family's life to end the chaotic days. But all those pleas, anger, and heartbreak fell on deaf ears. He still chose to keep Brennis by his side. Perhaps because of love, perhaps because of weakness, or maybe because of a fragile hope that everything would eventually be okay, time gradually passed. Although she no longer held the central role in the Quesada family as before, Brennis still lived in the luxurious house, still surrounded by convenience. But deep in her heart, she understood that her position was no longer what it used to be. What she once had, trust, implicit power, influence in the family, was now shaken. And though she hadn't been pushed out of the game yet, she knew she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Her past actions now hung like a suspended blade, ready to cut off all the privileges she currently possessed at any moment. Perhaps it was the fear of losing everything, status, assets, and the implicit power in the family that made Bones try to find ways to reconnect the broken threads. Some sources suggest that on the evening of Wednesday, April 4, 2019, she proactively invited Jacobo to have dinner at the auxiliary apartment on the first floor of the gym, a place that had once been a familiar living space for the whole family. According to accounts, she also asked him to bring the children, with the reason being her desire to reconcile, make peace, and erase the tensions that had lasted for many months. However, other reports gave a completely different version of the events. According to these, Hakabo and his children had already been present at the auxiliary apartment before, having dinner as usual, when Brennis suddenly appeared. She said she came to exercise, a reason that sounded normal on the surface, but was quite unusual for her, as coming to the gym in the evening was not one of Brennis' familiar habits. Although the accounts of the specific developments of that evening still had many contradictions, one thing was confirmed. For some reason, Brennis had left the room where her husband and children were having dinner and went alone toward the gym. Before leaving, she asked the security guard on duty at the entrance to come with her to help check the facilities and assist her with some exercises. After that, in the empty space, Brennis played loud music, appearing as if she was really exercising. Around midnight, she even posted a photo on social media taken right at the gym with a status message asserting that she had to exercise. This action made all her behavior that night seem reasonable in a strange way, as if everything had been calculated beforehand. More than an hour later, the exercise session ended. The security guard, who was still assisting her, left the area to return downstairs, checking that everything was still okay during his absence. Brennis followed him, claiming she wanted to find Hakabo and the children. But when they returned, the room where the whole family had once gathered was completely empty. No one was there. When Brennis and the security guard entered the dining room, they immediately faced a shocking and unbelievable scene. The room was completely messy with furniture scattered as if it had just gone through a fierce struggle. On the floor, red liquid stains were scattered and stretched into streaks. And then, when the bathroom door was opened, horror struck without warning. On the cold tile floor of the bathroom were the motionless bodies of 3 people. Hakabo Quesada, 51 years old, along with his 2 children. All 3 bore multiple serious wounds from gunshots. Based on the position of the bodies, it seemed they had been forced to kneel at the time of the attack. Initially, Baron stood frozen like stone. But just a few moments later, she regained her composure and immediately called the police. Within minutes, ambulances and special investigation units from the police were on the scene. Their medical personnel quickly confirmed that Jacobo's 2 children had died on the spot. Hakabo himself was still barely alive. Immediately, He was taken to the hospital in an emergency rescue attempt. However, all the doctors' efforts proved futile. Jacobo Quesada breathed his last not long after being brought to the hospital. When law enforcement conducted a crime scene investigation, they immediately began interrogating those present at the time of the murder, including Berenice and the security guard. Both gave similar statements. They claimed they saw nothing and heard no strange sounds from the dining room or bathroom during their time upstairs. However, what made investigators suspicious was the facility's security camera system. When they requested to extract recording data from the time frame when the incident occurred, they discovered that all cameras had been turned backward toward the wall, preventing them from recording any developments inside. This behavior was clearly intentional. Someone had deliberately disabled the surveillance system right before or during the crime. Just when the leads seemed to hit a dead end, a neighbor living directly across from the main entrance of the gym proactively contacted the police. This woman provided video footage from her home security camera recording the moment a motorcycle stopped in front of the facility early that morning. According to her account, a man got off the bike and walked into the building while the driver turned around heading toward the road leading to the back where there was known to be a secondary exit from the gym. Another resident also provided additional important testimony. This witness described in detail a man wearing a baseball cap who was the one who entered the gym from the front when the motorcycle stopped. Based on this description, police were able to sketch a preliminary suspect portrait. Although it was past 1 a.m. on Thursday, April 5th, the appearance of the man at the gym area didn't immediately raise suspicion because this place regularly had people coming and going, even late at night. This brutal crime quickly shocked all of Mexico. No one could understand what could lead to such a savage massacre, taking the lives of a successful businessman and two young children. People who were known for their exemplary image, spotless in the eyes of friends, neighbors, and the business community. The person who suffered the biggest shock was Patricia, Jacobo's ex-wife. Immediately after receiving the terrible news, she flew from Spain back to Mexico, carrying with her the ultimate pain of a mother who had to receive news of the sudden and tragic death of both her children in one fateful night. Amid the wave of outrage and grief engulfing public opinion, some theories began to emerge. Some thought this might be a revenge attack by armed criminal organizations. Perhaps Jacobo had been involved in debt or underground conflicts with gangs in the underworld. However, authorities quickly dismissed this possibility after reviewing the victim's financial records and business relationships. Nevertheless, within the Quesada family, another suspicion silently arose. Because of the cold-blooded method of execution, the staged crime scene, and the deliberately disabled camera system, they began to believe that the perpetrator might not be a stranger at all. The fact that the facility's surveillance camera system was deliberately turned away from key areas, along with clear contradictions in the testimonies of the only two people present at the crime scene when the murder occurred, quickly made investigators focus their suspicions on Berenice. Just hours after the incident, agents from the Mexico City Citizen Security Department issued an arrest warrant for her. Berenice was taken to a detention center where she was held for investigation. However, the real shock came from the legal system. Less than 48 hours later, a judge declared the arrest illegal, reasoning that the prosecutor's office had violated procedural rules when issuing the detention order without fully meeting the necessary legal requirements. As a result, Berenice was released, a decision that left the victim's family in a state of outrage and despair. Not only were they angry about the main suspect escaping detention, the Quesada family also began to deeply suspect that the prosecutor in charge of the case had deliberately manipulated or made suspiciously elementary errors aimed at creating conditions for Berenice's release. For them, this was no longer a mistake, but a blatant betrayal of justice. Their disappointment was pushed to its peak when less than a day after being released, Berenice immediately began procedures to rent out the gym, the place where the massacre of 3 people had just occurred and was still considered a crime scene under investigation. This cold action was not only shocking, but also showed an attitude of indifference to the point of cruelty. Not long after being released, Barron continued to attract attention with a series of actions that further outraged public opinion. According to neighbors' accounts at the family home in Hidalgo, which had been the residence of Jacobo and his wife, people saw Brenes appear again. But more notable than anything was the appearance of about 17 large tow trucks and transport vehicles mobilized to take away a series of high-end vehicles, including luxury cars and expensive motorcycles, all belonging to Jacobo's personal collection, with a total estimated value of up to 20 million Mexican pesos, equivalent to nearly 1 million US. After this event, Brenes disappeared without explanation, leaving no trace, causing public anger to flare up even more fiercely. Meanwhile, authorities continued to expand the investigation, while Jacob's family never stopped demanding justice. The increasingly leaked details about Barron's cold, callous behavior after being released made public opinion even more indignant. It didn't take long for Mexican media to start calling her by a haunting nickname, the Black Widow. Under pressure from public opinion and the victim's family, the prosecutor's office decided to restart the case. A special task force was established to recollect all evidence, testimonies, and new circumstances that could support issuing a new arrest warrant for Brenes. Fortunately, a woman who had worked as an assistant to Jacobo contacted the prosecutor's office, expressing her desire to testify. According to her initial statement, she said she had repeatedly witnessed acts of abuse and tyrannical control that Berenice had applied to her husband and his children. However, when this witness came to the investigation agency's office to formally present her testimony, she was approached by two men. They claimed to be lawyers representing Brenes legally sent by the Black Widow to assist. However, the woman who had been Jacob Sasada's assistant stood firm. She asserted that she didn't know the two men who approached her and hadn't requested any legal services from them. When she refused this suspicious assistance, the two men began to become aggressive. They tried to forcibly drag her out of the prosecutor's office with the intention of preventing her from giving testimony incriminating Brenes. Fortunately, the investigating officers at the headquarters witnessed the incident and intervened in time, protecting the witness and arresting the two men. Both were later identified as Luis Alberto Morales Aylar, 38 years old, and Arturo Corona Plato, 41 years old. What was particularly noteworthy was that Arturo was said to be Brenes' current boyfriend. Not only that, his appearance closely resembled the suspect's sketch released by police earlier based on witness descriptions related to the massacre. This made investigators not rule out the possibility that Arturo could be an accomplice or even the person directly involved in committing the crime. In the following months, Berenice completely disappeared from the control of authorities. However, reports of discovering her whereabouts in various locations began to appear increasingly frequently. Some witnesses claimed to have seen her in the cities of Pachuca Dodo and Mexico City. According to accounts, Berenice was spotted driving one of the luxury cars from Jacobo's collection, appearing at shopping centers, restaurants, and even bars as if she was completely unbound by any investigation orders. Additionally, there were reports of sightings in Puebla and Querétaro where security agents had quickly organized emergency capture campaigns. However, each time when forces arrived at the location, Brenes had managed to escape in time, leaving behind a faint trail and a big question: who was protecting the Black Widow? According to the Sasada family, the prosecutor who had been in charge of the case, the one who had created conditions for Berenice's unusual release, might be the very person who had secretly informed her about legal proceedings in advance. They believed that by knowing the case developments beforehand, Brenes had been able to prepare in time to disappear right after being released. From then on, the family formally filed a complaint and demanded the dismissal of this prosecutor, considering this a dangerous link, weakening the entire investigation and prosecution process. The more they investigated, the more outraged public opinion became as more shocking information continued to be revealed. According to blogs and websites established by the victim's family themselves to update case developments, Berenice was said to have gone on vacation to Las Vegas, Nevada. Not alone, but with her new boyfriend, whom they identified as Eduardo Karim. Although this identity hadn't been officially confirmed, the news spread enough to further fuel the fire of anger in the hearts of the family and the public. According to accusations from the family, Bones had used the money obtained from selling Jacobo's collection of luxury cars and motorcycles to flee and enjoy a lavish life outside the law. What was worth noting was that she had neither keys nor legal ownership documents for these vehicles. Therefore, the buying and selling transactions she conducted were currently being investigated by authorities as unusual transactions, showing signs of property fraud. However, the climax still hadn't stopped there. While still being wanted through her team of lawyers, Berenice suddenly filed a lawsuit demanding to inherit all of Jacobo Casada's assets. In the petition, she declared herself the sole legal heir and therefore had the right to own the entire fortune that this businessman had spent his life accumulating. According to local media, this fortune was estimated at that time to be worth up to 400 million Mexican pesos. In 2020, after nearly a year of being immersed in outrage and deadlock, the family of businessman Jacobo Casada decided to take action. They formally accused Berenice of deliberately misappropriating the estate through fraud while simultaneously announcing a reward of 200,000 Mexican pesos for anyone who could provide verified information, helping to determine her location and, if possible, help police arrest the suspect. Finally, after many months of additional investigation and pressure from public opinion, on December 20, 2020, the Mexico City Prosecutor's Office officially issued a warrant to search for and arrest Berenice charges of aggravated homicide. This was the first major step forward in the effort to bring the Black Widow to justice. Not only that, faced with concerns that the suspect might have left Mexico, Interpol was also notified and an international arrest warrant was issued, putting Bones on the global wanted list as a suspect in a serious crime. In early 2021, another event continued to stir up waves of controversy in public opinion. The prosecutor who had been in charge of the initial investigation phase, the one the Casada family had accused of deliberately following wrong procedures leading to Berenice's release, was dismissed. According to reports, he was found to have had serious violations while performing his duties, including delaying the handover of victims' bodies to the family, as well as collecting illegal fees to speed up legal procedures. However, another year passed, the case of the massacre of 3 people, which had once shocked Mexican public opinion, remained stagnant. But then on Wednesday, July 20, 2022, after 3 long years of hiding, Berenice Alanis Morales finally fell into the legal net. According to official information from the Guerrero State Prosecutor's Office, the arrest took place after an anonymous informant recognized Berenice and reported to authorities. From there, a coordinated campaign between investigation agencies of Mexico City and Guerrero State was urgently deployed. Agents found Berenice walking on the streets in the famous tourist city of Acapulco. At the time of her arrest, she was staying at a luxury hotel, living a life of silk and luxury as if no murder had ever occurred. Immediately after, she was escorted back to Mexico City. A week later, on July 26th, the first trial session took place. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecutor's office formally brought serious charges: intentional homicide with firearms, one of the heaviest charges in Mexican criminal law. After the prosecutor's office presented sufficient evidence, the judge officially linked Berenice Alanis Morales to the serious homicide case, issued a detention order, and allowed 3 months of additional investigation. She was transferred to a detention center where she had to remain awaiting trial. However, Bones persistently delayed the prosecution process through numerous complaints, appeals, and continuously changing lawyers. Nevertheless, Patricia Arellano, the mother of 2 victims, was the person who helped promote Berenice's arrest despite facing security risks for herself and her family. On October 24th, Berenice was escorted by women's rights activists who accused her of being a victim of a hate campaign and discriminatory media coverage through the nickname Black Widow. They demanded her release and suggested reviewing the entire case. Although some evidence was dismissed, the judge still ordered her detention until the next trial session. If convicted, Bones could face up to 50 years in prison. However, to this day, the case still has no conclusion. What verdict do you think will be given to Baroness? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for following along and see you in the next.